Everyone, I welcome everyone to the day four of the 5-day online FDP on innovation and acquisition of intellectual property rights under ATAL Academy FDP scheme organized by Inter-University Center for IPR Studies. As already announced earlier, today we are starting with session 2, and I welcome Smriti and Prati, a student of second semester, 5-year integrated LLM IPR PhD of IUCA PRS, to render the welcome speech. Smriti, please.
Thank you, Sita. Good morning, one and all. As already mentioned, today is the 4th day of our ATAL FTP on innovation and acquisition of IPR, organized by IUC IPRS and ATAL Academy. For the present session on technological assessment and valuation, we are fortunate to have Mr. T. Sharat with us as a resource person. He is the Vice President, Patent Portfolio Development at Clairvolex. Mr. Sharat is an IP expert and business leader with 15 years of experience that includes clear and impactful highlights in all stages of IP assessment and management. He has led patent portfolio development businesses and managed patent portfolio for Fortune 500 companies in US, European, and Indian jurisdictions. He has been frequently interfacing with in-house counsel attorneys, outside counsels, R&D, and inventors for establishing IP processes, review, and optimization of resources with emphasis on invention management, patentability search and analysis, patent preparation and prosecution, monetization, and litigation. He has a deep understanding of patent laws for multiple jurisdictions. He is professionally affiliated to the Indian Patent Bar. With respect to his education, he has a Bachelor of Engineering degree from MD University of Haryana. He has also done an Executive Management program from IIM Ahmedabad. He is also currently pursuing a Bachelor of Law degree from Karnataka State Law University. I welcome you, sir, to the session on my personal behalf and on the behalf of our institution. Sir, if you may please.
Thank you, Smriti. Thank you for organizing this program, and thank you for inviting me. I will jump straight to the topic of presentation today. I will share my screen. If you can please confirm that you are able to see. Hello.
Yeah, it is visible.
Yes, sir.
But it's not in the presentation mode.
Yeah. Now is it?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, I should have started with hoping all of you are safe and healthy at home, and all your family members are safe and healthy as well. And I should also mention that I am in Kerala. Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in Kerala. Coincidentally, I'm in Kollam. So I'm taking the session from Kerala, and I know that things are not pretty good in here. So I really wish that everybody is safe and are following all the safety protocols, and things will be normal. With that thought, over to now the topic in hand. So technology assessment and valuation was a topic given. And before kind of jumping into the slides and the content there, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes on understanding the topic itself and set the context right. So technology assessment is a very broad term, and we often mix it with a lot of other concepts and phrases. So I would clearly distinguish it, and I would clearly define it so that there is the basic understanding of technology assessment is clear. And the next part, or a smaller part of the topic, is valuation, which is entirely different and has a very solid body of work in terms of research or in terms of literature you can find out there. So to begin with, technology assessment, what is the meaning of this terminology? Now, we should not immediately assume that anything to do with technology assessment means money, or some sort of numbers, or some sort of value which the technology holds. And I'm very consciously using the word technology and not IP asset. Okay. Technology again is different from IP asset. IP, I know for so many sessions you would have heard IP examples, but technology is different. Hence, technology assessment is also different from IP asset. So the definition, again, few definitions from few sources I could gather. It is a very broad definition is scientific, interactive, communicative process. And for doing what? To form a public and political opinion on science and technology development. So it has nothing to do with inventor. It has nothing to do with R&D head. It is a very broad definition. I don't think so it does justice to this session of IP asset. So we have a little more focused definitions that follow. For example, the third definition, it's a form of policy research that examines the short and long-term consequences of the application of technology. Now that is a little specific, that what impact the technology will have on the society or economic impacts on the stakeholders like the inventors or the owner of the company or even the end user. What are the ethical impacts, if any, and what are the legal impacts? So that kind of is a little more narrow in terms of what technology assessment means, right? But again, from a decision-making point of view or from a judgment point of view, second definition I like more. It is a study and evaluation of technologies. Simple. Now, why do I need to study this? So remember, technology is planning activity. I need to assess the technology before I have developed it, before I have to invest time and effort in research. I need to assess whether this technology is going to be favorable. Favorable to whom? Not just me, to lot of stakeholders, right? Now, what is the need for such an assessment? We should understand. The need is as follows. Typically, what happens is the technology assessment is understood to be done or should be only restricted to scientific community. Scientific community meaning doctors, postdoctoral research fellows, or eminent scientists who, in terms of knowledge, definitely have the right and the equipment to review others' work, right? And they can comment, they can criticize, they can encourage, they can further, work on those research, and they can assess the technology in their own way. However, they are not equipped to, ethically or legally review. That assessment is more from a laboratory perspective or a research perspective, academic perspective. There are lots of factors which we will talk today about that are outside of laboratory going to impact lot of people economically, socially, and even legally, politically. All these factors may not be considered by the scientists while they assess a technology by a colleague or in a paper. Second, there is a diffusion of technology or transfer of technology from the laboratory to the market, to the production floor, to the end user, to the shop, howsoever you kind of look at the value chain. So technology assessment needs to take care of all the touch points in terms of all the stakeholders and not just academics. That's why technology assessment is required. It is holistic. And finally, I would say the most important point, the need point for today's session, and I would expand on that for the remainder of the session today, is because I think this group here would comprise of all those people who would want to develop technology either as part of research, who would want to contribute to the leadership in terms of deciding which technologies we need to follow and invest in, or who may be the CTOs or legal counsels or R&D heads. They need to understand how to optimally consider various factors during technology development. Again, this is a forecast. I have not yet started developing technology. I need to understand what factors I have to consider. And the word optimal is important because certain factors may outweigh the others. It cannot be all the factors equally weighted. So I need to understand. Now we will get into the details of what these factors are. So I kind of structured the presentation in two parts. I would stop after the first part, which is technology assessment, and take in questions. And as you can see, I may not be able to read any questions coming in the chat window. So I will address any question in the chat window during that break in between. And then we will cover valuation. And towards the end also, we will have a question answer session. I hope that is fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Yes, sir.
Great. Now, what are the factors that impact technology development? Remember, as a stakeholder, we need to understand these factors and which factors would outweigh the others, right? So consider any technology. It can be a face mask or a vaccine. What does the technology do? The main object of the technology, right? Understand. I think this is very easy, the first part. So I will not spend a lot of time. Second, is it better than the alternatives that are present already in the market? So this is more of a, in terms of patent, we call it, let's say, a prior art search, but that is for a different objective. Will I get a patent or not? But here, this is more of a management exercise where I want to understand the threat of alternatives. Meaning, what advantages my technology will have in comparison to the alternatives. Are there any advantages at all? Now, alternatives are not just the currently available technologies or products in the market. Remember, by the time your product hits the market, it would be another 5 years. So you have to forecast and predict the alternatives that might come up in those 4-5 years as well. So it is very easy to read and say and talk about it, difficult to actually study alternatives. Lot of research is happening in any domain you think of. You may not know because it is kept secret. So you have to think of advantages that would outweigh even those alternatives in the next 5 years. Only then you would be able to reap the benefit of your investment. Now, third, another important consideration, again, a management principle. What is the user persona of the people who are going to receive this technology? Who would derive value from this? Is it a safety pin which will be used in every household, or is it a calendar schedule assistant used by chief executive officers? Both these personas, target audience, they are completely different. And people may think, I have heard people say that, why is it so important? I know that this is useful. I am convinced this is useful. I should go ahead with it. No, that persona will not agree with your assessment, technology assessment, in terms of value that comes with the safety pin. A safety pin may not be as valuable to a CEO as a calendar assistant. Similarly, for a housewife, a calendar assistant may not be so valuable, but a safety pin will be, right? So what is the application of my technology for that target audience? What is the frequency of use? A footwear is more likely to be used as against paperweight, right? So understanding the persona of my target audience definitely impacts technology development, sorry. Next is, who would be motivated to adopt this technology? Again, this may not be exactly same as the target audience, but in that there will be a subset who should be motivated. You have to figure out who will be motivated. And the word adoption is very important, because it's not very easy for people to adapt and adopt to a new technology. Even though the benefits may be high, even though the cost advantages are high, but there is always a threshold of change or adoption. So you have to figure out who are the early adopters, who would be your champions. They would spread the word. They would also they would be the evidence of proof of concept. Then you can say that early results show that it is so much of a success. So, but what is it that they would get motivated from, by? What are those factors you have to study separately? Lot of money, by the way, is spent in all these factors in business management sense, to understand all the background personas and their motivations, whether it is a chocolate, whether it is a washing machine, or whether it is a wall paint. Okay. Now, a little more objective set of factors, cost and benefit. Everybody understands this. What are the costs involved? What are the benefits? But again, it is not very easy as it looks here. Cost is not just the direct cost. There are indirect costs. There are taxes that you would have paid. And then the benefit is also subjective. It is very subjective concept that what is the benefit perceived by me versus somebody else. So cost benefit analysis is important for adoption of technology, whether early adoption or eventually later by the entire population. Now, again, a subset of that is what are the factors that would affect the adoption decision. For example, change management, again, a chapter in management, where how to facilitate change. There will be anxiety, there will be inertia, there will be repulsion to something which is complex and sophisticated and touch screen, because we are used to certain way. There would be challenges in terms of law or legal provisions would prohibit or may have certain complication. There may be policies that are in place, and above all, if nothing works in India, there may be political factors, right? A particular area or region having a strong political influence may not be conducive for adoption of a path-breaking technology. And suddenly the stakeholders might be, caught by surprise that what just happened. So those factors also would affect the adoption decision, and we need to consider that. Now, there is something, I've called this value prism, where these are the factors these are the parameters which have to be considered for all these factors and not in isolation, together. Some of them may be more relevant for one factor, some may be for the others, like compliance to ISO standards, environmental standards, emission standards, or the standards prescribed by any country's law. Safety, not just of the end user, but right from the first person who is involved in the manufacture of the technology or product or process. Reliability in terms of repeated success, or in terms of the ratio of success versus hit versus miss. Convenience of use, ease of use, as somebody would call it. What is the cost? Capital cost is not for end user, but for people who are investing. Operating cost, again. Throughput and quality is pretty much a standard that are attributes of any new technology. Environmental life cycle means if there are constituents or components in the technology that are difficult to be disposed, or they're not easily biodegradable, then there is a life cycle for that. Is there a recycle process? All those things. Cycle time is the process time. Again, as I said, recycling right from the first time manufactured to back to the same process, and availability of raw materials. So these value prisms, this value prism I have repeatedly used when I have expanded upon each of these factors. So the first factor, what does the technology do? Very easy to find out. Typically, we write it in the patent specification that what is it going to do? What are the objects? The object of the invention is so and so. It solves, it purifies water, for example, or it obstructs or stops coronavirus from entering into our lungs by means of layers of mask or whatever. How does it work? What is the mechanism? One should understand what functions. So it is just basically very technical, but more from an outward looking perspective on the application and the end user. It is not a research you are doing in terms of prior art search or a landscape research. No, the objective here is different, to understand in the context of technology assessment. So don't go very deep. Understand what it does, how it functions. Okay. Is there any mention in the patent specification or any document about the metrics of success. How do you measure the performance of any technology? So somebody known in GE, right, a pioneer in innovation, once said that you cannot improve something you cannot measure. If you cannot measure something, you cannot improve, because you don't know the standard or the current value of some index. How can you improve it, right? So technology, any technology which you are developing, needs to have some sort of metric to measure success, metrics to measure that it is a great, technology. Great has to have a number. It can be relative, it is a better technology, or absolute, that it is the best, it is the technology available today, so there is no comparison, right? So these questions need to be answered, or should be clear under this factor. What does the technology do? Again, you can use the parameters of the value prism in terms of answering these questions, right? But keep in mind that it is not a technical assessment, it is not a theoretical academic research project. No, it is more of an assessment objectively. Second, threat of alternatives we already mentioned, but how does the alternatives, are they perceived as alternatives by the intended audience who are going to use, and is the performance better than those alternatives? And again, those alternatives that will come up in future, not just the current one. And how the performance advantage will be useful to a specific application. So this is a little more application specific. It, for example, in the context of, let's say, a paperweight, right? What are the alternatives in Indian households? Or if you just think about anything to hold the paper onto the table, you might just use a pen stand in the spur of the movement, just to prevent the paper from flying, versus a very sophisticated, good looking designated paperweight, okay, which people have to buy. What is the advantage, performance advantage of that designated paperweight versus this pen stand, which actually is multitasking? It holds pens for me also, right? So it is very specific to the application. What is the performance indicator for that particular technology? And does it matter at all to that person at all? Does he really bother that it was a pen stand and I look very frugal and miserly, right? That I couldn't buy a separate designated paperweight. So all these factors have to be considered during assessment. Okay. Next is, again, this is the user persona we talked about, but not just the end users. It has to be who would manufacture, who would sell, and who would stock it. What are the kind of shops or shopkeepers who are going to sell this product, or is it going to be online, whatever you call it, but who are all going to derive this? Don't only think from the perspective of end user who would buy a mobile phone and will be very happy. There are people who would manufacture it. There are spare parts or parts that would come from various manufacturers, or OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. Those people will also derive value of this technology. They did not do anything, but because of this technology, whatever they manufacture is required more in number. Second is, what is the perceived advantage and performance? First of all, what are the advantages that would be perceived? And secondly, would it matter to these intended recipients? Now, there is a lot of money spent on this part. It is perceived, and hence you can create a perception, manage a perception. Again, a separate chapter in management science. You can market it in a way that you can influence user behavior and create a perception of advantage. There may be actually an advantage, but it can be an exaggerated perception. So will it matter to the intended recipient? You have to study, understand. Will that performance increase of, let's say, a medical efficacy, increase of 10% for a drug, does it matter to an end user who just buys it and takes it? A person who is not educated doesn't even know which medicine, simply goes to the medical store and says, I need this medicine. Maybe, some medicine which does not require a prescription from a doctor. Will that person perceive that advantage or the performance metric of 10% efficacy matter to that intended recipient? So accordingly, people market it, people create a white space analysis, or people differentiate the advantage with respect to the nearest competing product. So this is again very important to study. And the next one is, who would be the early adopters? So very important to understand that the technology never goes from 0 to 100. It always is developed at a stage, or in a stage wise process. So it will be, inception, then the initial blueprint or the plan, and then you would have milestones, and those milestones will be planned in such a manner that each milestone will lead to a decision whether or not to pursue the next milestone, and so on. After that, when it reaches some stage of maturity, or product maturity, or technology maturity, you need to define user groups who are going to be your early adopters or targets. I would not want to call them guinea pigs, because they're not. It is a valid user group. They are maybe sometimes under controlled environment, or it may not be related to a user, but the performance of the technology can be studied on its own. For example, auto braking system, or the tests that are conducted for airbags that should be deployed when there is a collision. You can find a lot of videos on YouTube. Every car, they do this test before they kind of release it. So that's a controlled environment testing, because they would define the impact, they would define the environment, they would also define where it will be hit and all that. But you need to do that to study how it will be adopted and by the user groups. Second is, what are the factors that influence potential early adopters? Because if they don't adopt, they won't spread the word, and it would fail at that stage. And how would they perceive the benefits? The benefits which you are trying to portray or you are proposing, how would they perceive it? Will they perceive it to the same intensity level, or they may not understand what is environmental factor? I don't even care that I buy plastic. It is very durable. I am so happy that I don't probably care much about the environment, that it is non-biodegradable, right? So how would they perceive? We have to understand. What is the value proposition? Very important. And actually this supersedes all the other factors. Anything to be adopted, anything new to be adopted, there is always an inertia. There is always a resistance to change. Why should I adopt something new? I'm so comfortable and happy with the things currently, going on. I need to now understand, I need to figure out, I need to try, I have to come out of the comfort zone. I don't like changes. Generally, people don't like changes. So what is the value proposition? It has to be thought through and articulated in that manner, where it is perceived as value. Generally, value is basically, equated to benefits minus cost. Because I don't just get benefit from a new technology, I need to pay for it. Something needs to go from me, and then in return consideration, I get some benefit. So the benefits minus cost is value should be considerable for me to part with my money, to incur that cost. So either increase the benefit many folds, decrease the cost, then you get a solid value. If the cost remains the same, also is fine. Increase the benefit for the same cost. If the benefits remain the same, it is also fine if you reduce the cost. Overall, what I'm concerned is I need value, and that will motivate me as an early adopter to adopt this technology and be your champion of success. I can spread the word. Excuse me. Now, cost benefit analysis are final factor we spoke about. So cost is not direct cost. As I said, it is a perceived cost. So some people may think that if I need to buy something from a storeroom, I will only incur the cost of let's say 10,000 rupees, which is the MRP of the product, right? But some others would also think that I have to travel to that store, and these days petrol has become so expensive, and I will of course take my family and whatever. So there are indirect costs involved. For a businessman, if he's paying in cash, his perceived cost is different because maybe that money is not taxed, versus for a salaried employee, that the perceived cost is different. So it all depends on the persona of the end user, or the who will benefit from this technology. What is the persona of that user? How would they perceive the cost? How would they perceive, same way, the benefit? Benefit is also perceived very differently from by different classes of people. So what is the class of people or section of population we are targeting? Will they perceive the benefit as we are proposing? If not, we have to manage that perception, create that perception, right? Or communicate that perception. So as I already mentioned, either cost is reduced with respect to the current cost, benefit is more than the current set of benefits, or both. Both is awesome. You give me more benefits for reduced cost as compared to what it is today. Value proposition is very compelling, but it is not easy to achieve that. Usually we want to actually make profits. We want to give benefits at a premium sometimes. So the benefits should be so good. There is an anti-cancer drug that cost is not a big consideration for somebody who is actually, potentially suffering from cancer. They may not think about the cost. They may crowdsource, or they may do some sort of fundraising, and they will get that drug. So you have to understand what application, what technology, what are the user group sets, who is the intended recipient, what is their perception of the cost, and what is their perception of the benefit. All this would come together and will lead to a very solid, comprehensive technology assessment. Now, there are other factors that impact technology adoption. I will not adopt even internally or externally if there are risks involved. Most of them I have classified as risks only. There is always a risk in any technology development. And remember, technology assessment is a planning activity. Even before I started investing time and effort, I am assessing the technology from various viewpoints, just to ensure that there is a return of investment. I don't run into any roadblocks. I should mitigate all the risks which I should know now, not after I have already invested. So what are the risks? There are technology risks, which is very straightforward. That means the technology may not actually work. It may not work. Any technology may have a chance of failure. It may not be reliable. Quality may not be better. It may be same quality or sometimes inferior. Or the physical dimensions or the attributes of the product may not be favorable. Or very interesting terminology I found, technology readiness. Sometimes some companies have invented or introduced some very cool, amazing technologies, but have failed to capitalize on it because the market did not respond to that technology. The reason was we were not ready for that. It was, let's say, too much of an advanced technology, the benefits of which couldn't be appreciated by people in the current era. Had it been timed 5 years from that point, it would have been better received. So readiness is very important, very subjective, very difficult to determine that are we ready to accept a particular technology? Have we invented beyond the current era? Have I invented something which should have been invented 15 years from now? If I do, and if I release it, probably people may not find it very eye-catchy or cool. Second type of risk is implementation risk. Technology is very cool. Everything is awesome, but it is very complex. It is complex to understand, to teach, to train. It is not reverse compatible to the existing systems. So it is a complete overhaul of the previous systems and methods. and adopt a new one, implement a new one. So there is a risk. People may say, no, I don't want that. Although your technology is cool, it looks very awesome, but because of the complexity, leave me, boss. I don't want to, right? Or training, current practices are so prevalent and deeply entrenched. I don't want. Third set of risks, environmental risks. Again, as citizens or individuals, we may not realize, but it has increasingly become a very important factor. You can't disregard the environmental impact of an invention. However, there is always a cost benefit analysis. The cost in this context will be the impact on environment versus the benefit will be the benefit for humanity. So if the benefit outweighs the cost or the price you have paid, sometimes the invention can still survive the risk of environment. So what is the impact of manufacturing? The carbon dioxide emission or carbon footprint. What is the impact of disposing the waste? Life cycle impact. Is there any safety hazard that is associated with the technology, etc.? Next is business risk, very straightforward. I may put in a lot of money, but I may not get the returns for a long time, right? Or the technology uptime is itself 3 years. That means I have to be prepared for close to 5 years of investment and no return. So I need to educate my investors accordingly. Will they invest? There is a risk. What is the reputation risk of my business if I already have a brand name, Amazon, and I am venturing into a new business of groceries, for example, Amazon groceries. So what is the reputation risk I run? Because I have very solid, Amazon cloud business running. I have other businesses running very fine. So what is the risk? Service support and training, again, because it's a new technology, you need new departments, you need upskilling of the existing team to support and to handle the service requests and the existing relationship. Sometimes there are conflicts with your current partners in business that you can't venture into a new technology without impacting the business interest of one of your investors or partners. So how do you manage that risk, right? The other two are now social and political risks. Again, just for discussions, but not people don't think heavily about it. But nevertheless, you might find one of these risks simply posing a big threat and challenge to your technology adoption. So social risk is like the economic impact for the producer. His social status will have an impact for the user also, end user, and community impact. Suppose there is a local region in a village or a community, and their bread and butter is dependent on a particular way of doing things, and you come up with a technology which will render that community's livelihood completely zero. There will be a risk. There will be an opposition from that community. It will then slowly become a political risk because of vote bank that community might hold. So you need to be aware of that risk. Lastly, political risks again include government policies, or there would be certain policies that the government has formulated to encourage Indian inventions or innovations in the country rather than sourcing it from MNCs in the US or Europe. So there may be risks when you are collaborating with some innovator in outside of our country. So you have to understand the impact in terms of politically positioning the innovation and how to promote adoption. You can always join hands with the government, talk about collaboration, talk about development, talk about how it will impact India or this country and position it differently, but you have to consider that as a risk. So I will take a pause here, as I said, and I can take any questions if you have.
Dear participants, if you have any concerns, you can ask directly now itself. So please. or put it in the chat box.
Yeah, put it in the chat box and I can read that and accordingly answer.
Any questions? Yeah.
Okay, so there is a question from Professor Alok Kumar. Technology adoption is easier or technology adaptation is easier? So adaptation is actually included in as a concept in adoption. Adoption starts from listening to and being open to implementing a technology, then using it and adapting my existing way of working according to the new technology. So I would say, adaptation as an activity is a sub activity. It is probably easier. Adoption has a lot of other things. I have to be open to accepting the technology, spending money, time, and when I use, I adapt. I adapt my use case, my application of the technology. I adapt to it. I adapt the way it works. So it is more about after I have invested and started adopting. So adaptation, I would say, is easier. Next question, if any. Okay, how can we have mass adoption of technology in coming years? If you take care of all the factors we just discussed and made sure that each of the factors you understood well, each of the risks we talk about, you have measures to mitigate, you have a very clear strategy on what is the intended recipient. You used mass adoption. That means technology has to be something that is relevant to the masses and not certain class only. So we are talking about safety pin probably here, or something like a footwear. Okay, so you have to think about such technologies, invest in technologies like that, then think about the adoption aspect, that how these people or the intended recipients will adopt. The benefits should be very high, cost should be lower or same as what it is. There should be no threat from alternatives, and there should be no risks involved, which you currently see on my screen. Environmental risk should be less. It should be made out of jute, for example, the footwear, like that. So all these factors you have to consider for answering this one question. You have to talk about mass adoption. So adoption by masses means you're talking about a safety pin kind of a technology. Any other question, anyone? Okay. Hearing done, I will proceed with the next part, which is more on the valuation aspect. Can you see my screen? Can someone please confirm?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, great. Okay. Now, valuation, as the term suggests, right, there is a value part in it. So associating some value. Assessment never had it. Technology is, sorry. Okay. So the technology assessment, I never spoke about a particular value or a number. But when we talk about valuation, we need to talk about numbers, because we don't understand the comparatives, superlative degree of comparison. For example, I propose a mask here, which has infinite benefits. You will say, what is infinite? I'll say it has many benefits. It is much better. It is the best mask I can propose. It is not 19. So I won't say any numbers. I will keep using all these words: better, best, it is infinite, it is supersonic, it is godly mask. Please buy. Okay. No, people won't be convinced. A lot of people won't be convinced. Why? Because people relate to some sort of value, yes, but better represented in numbers. Now imagine we are talking about value of an intangible asset, which you can't even show that this box has my intangible asset and this is valued at. For a phone or for tangible assets, it is easier because you know the components, you know their production cost, you know the cost of marketing. You put all that together, you know a value of that asset. It's easier. But for an intangible asset, it is not easy. Hence, this is a very subjective topic, valuation, particularly in the context of IP. IP being intangible, you don't know the dimensions, you don't know the physical attributes, it is perceived, it is abstract, and anybody can disagree with the best valuation model which anybody else can propose. However, still, this term has existed for quite some time and people are trying to, create many definitions, create many theories on what is valuation. How can we put a value to an intangible asset, right? So there are some attempted definitions I have picked. So valuation is the process of identifying and I emphasize measuring benefit and risk from an intangible asset. Okay, identification still at an abstract level is fine. I feel the difference in this car, it is better. But how can you measure that this car is 23% smoother than the previous one? So valuation means identifying and measuring the benefit and the risk from an intangible asset is one definition. Typically, people think it is monetary value of an asset, IP or intangible asset. So monetary or financial valuation, of course, is straightforward. The definition is easier. It is basically measuring the value or worth of an asset. So if I have to write a will to my successors or survivors, I would actually write in that will my 100 patents I am giving to you and 3 properties to somebody else. Property meaning land and building. This guy who gets these 100 patents will not even value it. He will say this is worth nothing. So how do I create that value that he really is happy? Oh, there is a value in this asset. And it is not simply an objective value. Under certain circumstances, the value is valid. It is not valid always and blindly and universally and in any country. No. There are a lot of parameters or conditions with that value which you have calculated or which we will calculate. But remember, the first definition, measuring. Second definition, value or worth. Okay. Third is, in the second definition itself, cost and or price of an asset may be a good indicator of its value. Not the only indicator, but maybe a good indicator. Okay, so there are a lot of different types of value which in an intangible asset may provide. Sometimes it's an ownership value. Sometimes it's a social value. I am the inventor of 500 patents in very large scale integration. Gives me a lot of pride and my chest expands. It's a value for me. There is no number to it, but it is a value. However, for somebody else, I am able to license my patents and earn 20 lakhs every year. So my value is 20 lakhs for that IP asset and I'm happy with that value. I don't care. I did not invent it. I am the owner of the company and one of my employees invented. Right? So the value for an inventor is different or may be different from the value which is derived by a stakeholder or an assignee. Like that. So putting some number to the IP asset is what valuation is all about. Now, IP can derive its value from a lot of aspects, as I just mentioned. Its usefulness. So for an end user who is using the safety pin, there is a value. Value is basically the ease of stitching a piece of clothing or two pieces together. with ease and without hurting, and with the ease of use and to teach somebody else and so on. So the value can be usefulness. It can be for somebody else at a very high level of business management and operations, a market share. Actually, it can be for a shareholder of that particular company who derives value because he holds share of the safety pin manufacturing company. He has never used a safety pin, but he derives a value out of it. Then barrier to entry. So that's again another management term in terms of forces of market, which you have to understand. So if you have a technology which implicitly has certain barriers for the competitors to enter into the market, right, or potential competitors to enter into the market, that is a value you have. You have a value derived from the IP you hold, which is preventing entry for the competitors. So it is a position of strength in a negotiation or a discussion for something else completely different. But that is a negotiation value. It's good to have. It has no money involved, no number, but it is value. That's why I said cost and price of an asset is just one of the indicator of the value. Next is legal protection. So that is a value. For me, the value is I should never see, the court, or I should always be a law-abiding citizen. I don't want any cases on my name, right? So I go, I file my patent, I get all the protection, and then I practice my invention. So I want legal protection, and that gives me a sense of good night's sleep. That is value I derive from my IP asset. Profitability is very straightforward. I earn profits. That is value. Industrial and economic factors. Now, I might be a visionary and I want to change the landscape of the entire country in a particular domain of textiles, for example, right? So, or I want to mechanize or automate the entire textile industry and increase the overall throughput, quality, cost, decrease the cost, and overall provide lot of value to a lot of people. So it goes beyond value for me alone. It is for others and for a lot of stakeholders. That is also value I can derive from my IP. Growth projections, very important. People want to keep on holding on to their IP forever and make the most of it. However, especially for patents, it's a limited time, but I still want to project my growth in terms of incremental inventions. And since I hold the first invention, I can have a patent of addition, I can improve it, and I can simply keep the patent evergreen, as it is called in US. So I really derive value from a very fundamental invention for a longer time. And I grow in terms of all the other aspects of usefulness, market share, barrier to entry, legal protection, profits, all that. And yeah, I mean, remaining economic life and new technologies we already covered. So so there are a lot of aspects of value, and please don't always think of money when you talk about valuation of an IP asset. That is the intention behind this particular slide. Now, why do we need it? Why do we need to evaluate it when it is so difficult and abstract and intangible, so many challenges, and especially if it has maths involved? A lot of people don't like mathematics. Why do we need to put a number to a patent? We need. There are situations, for example, in IP litigation, you need the court needs to award some damages for potential infringement. Now, how much should the court award? What is the quantum of loss of right? Loss of right is very high, hence the quantum is high. How do we determine that number? So there has to be some logic. Typically, they consider the profits made by the infringer or the losses which were incurred by the patentee, for example. It may be beyond that. It may be the perceived value. It may be the investor's value. It may be the threat from competitors if they get to know about this trade secret, for example, right? So we need to put some number to it, and that some number the lawyers are not equipped to come up with. it needs some computation, some analysis, some models, financial models, mathematical models, study factors. Then it comes to quote from an external expert that this is the value or perceived value, and that compensation has to be awarded. The best part is that's why IP is interesting, since it is not universally accepted that how do we create a value for an intangible asset. It is always up for negotiation, or you can inflate it and go for higher value and you get something lower, it is fine. So second point is IP audit. A lot of companies, big companies, innovative companies like Qualcomm, Ericsson, Intel, they or IBM, for example, the undisputed champion in number of filings in US for the last 23 years or so. They have different departments, different targets, and they do an audit periodically every year. And in that audit, they want to understand how the different departments have performed. There is a governance meeting that happens. So certain department would only have 10 patents, or say, let's say 100 patents they would have obtained. And this one department had only 2 patents. Does it simply mean that the department with 100 patents did very well? No, not necessarily. Because those 2 patents earn a licensing revenue of 2 billion a year or 2 million a year, whereas those 100 are not worth their salt. Hence, valuation becomes a tool to kind of manage the audit process or to reward the performance of different departments in terms of how they developed IP assets. It is not number of patents only. Third, IP licensing. We just talked about it. So 2 million I generate. So how do I generate 2 million? I license my product to another company, but that company will pay me loyalty or license fee. How do I arrive at that license fee? How much is enough? How can I put a number to it? What will be the frequency of use of IP? How many such licensing agreements will I make? How many products he will manufacture and sell, and how much he will benefit, of which I need some benefit, like that. So I need to put some number somewhere on the agreement, licensing agreement. So valuation of IP is required there. Joint ventures. So there is a lot of, by the way, a lot of things go wrong in joint ventures because of incorrect or inaccurate valuation of IP. So two parties or two firms or two universities or university and government can collaborate for research and development, and they would want to develop something which, of course, they're investing time and money. If they want some return, they want to license it, right? So what should be the value of that license fee? How much should be the share between these two? Because one set of people would be the inventors, the others would be just the investors. In India, inventors actually don't have a lot of say because they work for a university or for an employer, and they assign all the rights in IP vested in the invention to these people. And so whosoever has money actually can invest and make a lot of money. So to decide upon the terms and conditions of joint ventures, we need valuation, or some initial valuation of IP is required. Mergers and acquisitions, very standard practices. Before any merger or before any acquisition, the company that is to be acquired will be valued, and that's a broad term, valued, because that company is worth whatever assets it has today, including the IP assets, right, have to be valued. There has to be some number given to it. Giving a number to the cars and the people in terms of salaries and the office space in terms of building is easier, but the company has some 10,000 patents. Each patent, what is the worth of that? How much should the acquiring company pay for acquiring these 10,000 assets? We need to put some model there and come up with some number. Now, also in terms of financial reporting, these are considered as assets and performing assets. They may generate revenue on their own accord, and it has to be reported. The asset value has to be reported like any asset you talk about in terms of tangible assets or assets with depreciating value. And most important for the startup companies is the investment part, where you need to get some funding. Remember, for funding, you would have a plan, you would have a proposal, you would have a technology assessment report, and as part of that report, somewhere you would have to put some numbers, because end of the day, investors are looking for numbers. They know the indicators of those numbers. They know these factors. They definitely will ask you all these questions, but they want to safeguard their investment. They will ask for, what is the value of this invention? How much will you make? How much we will make, right? They will ask all these questions. So you have to put some number to the technology or IP. Eventually, when it becomes a product, this would be the pricing. This would be the number of products. This would be yearly revenue. This would be the profit or whatever. That is how you extrapolate, and that is required. So valuation is important. Now, in terms of measuring and identifying the benefit and risk, it is not in isolation or objective. It is in a particular context. Context I already spoke about in the previous slide. So for any of these contexts, if you pick up, the valuation will have different factors involved. It will not be the same value of the same asset in all these contexts I mentioned. And since it is subjective, I will always want to drive my value of the IP to a point that benefits me. For example, in IP litigation, if I am the infringer, I would want to reduce the value, prove that the value is very less. Whereas if I am actually going for, I'm being acquired, my company is being acquired, I want to show that my IP assets are worth a lot of money, crores of rupees, millions of dollars. So depending on the context, the measurement of benefit and risk may differ. Ideally, it should be the same, but because there are no standard references for valuation across all these contexts and across industries, pharma industry to a chip manufacturing industry, there are no standards accepted by all. Hence, it is up in the air, subjective, and we always say in a particular context. Now, risk, when I say, is not just a risk of money, it is also risk in time. How much time do I need to bring some technology to market? Go to market, as it is called in management, is another study they do, that when should I time my launch of the product? What should be the first communication? Will I be a little too early or will I be a little too late? My first communication will get all the attention, and then people will be expecting. So there is always a risk in time that has to be measured.
Whoever is there, come and fill.
Sorry, is there a question for me?
I think participants unmuted themselves. Request all the participants to kindly mute the microphone, please.
It's okay. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, in the context of startup companies, and why I'm inclined to, because these days, for the last 2 years, I see a lot of startup companies approaching me and consulting for developing technologies. And it is super important for them to get a patent or to get IP protection and to jack up, to increase, to pump up their value. And I have actually been in investor presentations where the valuation of the company increased to 1.5 times when it was disclosed that there is a barrier to entry for competitors because we have filed patents for it. It's already filed. Whether that patent is granted or not, we have to see. Time will tell. But immediately the perceived value of the company increases. The risk is minimized in terms of money. I can invest money for this much, and I know that others will not be able to replicate this. So I can invest for a longer time also. I will give you more time to show me results. So it is very important to study or measure the benefit and risk while evaluating. Now, very broad, basic types of valuation which we know of, or everybody will find it easily. A lot of literature is there on this: qualitative and quantitative, right? And any which ways, end of the valuation exercise, I need a number, I need an index, I need some number to show me that it is valuable as compared to other asset which also has some number. So 5 as a value index for IP asset A, and same domain IP asset B has 4. So 5 is more valuable according to the index. So I need some number to arrive at this conclusion or decide upon the value. So two aspects, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is basically, as the name suggests, is very subjective. I create a framework, a scoring mechanism, or a model, which is, I mean, interestingly defined by me. I can create that. These are the 10 parameters. We will come to the parameters in a while. I think I can go straight, maybe. So I can define factors, I can define parameters, attributes, even weight. I can assign weights to them, and I can score multiple IP assets based on it. And based on a learning model, I can create a far more accurate score after I have done 500 IP asset qualitative analysis. So if I run 500 assets through my qualitative model, and the human model, that is me, would know that this asset is more valuable than the score shown by my model. So I will tweak my weight, hit and trial, and till I agree with the assessment of the model, human model versus the mathematical model. Then I'll say, hey, I have a qualitative model, and you run through this. I used 500 assets in a 5G domain. So this is a very good qualitative model for 5G domain patterns, which has very specific factors for 5G domain, 5G communication domain, like standard essential patterns, or commercialization markets where the IP has been filed. Is it Europe, India, US, like that? Very specific, but more from a qualitative aspect, that what will be the influence of IP in terms of the quality, right? Quantitative, on the other hand, is much more numeric or much more mathematical as qualitative. I cannot create lot of, I mean, I may create, of course, nobody can stop me, but there are a lot of models already existing, which I can use for quantitatively analyzing the value of my IP. So we will go to each one of them to study a little bit on, and I have not gone very deeper because then it enters into a lot of models, names of mathematical models and how they're used, right? So looking at the pedigree of the attendees here, I just kept it at a high level. So qualitative valuation, as I said, it has to assign a numerical value. This value is not cost, it is some index. Okay, so at a very micro level, study the quality of intangible assets in terms of IP will be, let's say, less prosecution, no rejection, broad claim scope. It was very broad, and the number of words in the claim, for example, was very less, and it is in a domain where the application or use case or the frequency of use will be very high. All these are aspects, qualitative aspects of the patent document I just spoke about, right? So I can put together a quality framework for patent applications, and I can review every patent application or granted patent using that quality framework. I can score it. And maybe for 5G particularly, I want a particular scoring. For Indian patents, I want a particular scoring. US, it's going to be a different utility patent application. It will be a different scoring. So I can create these quality parameters for patents filed in these different countries or different domains, and accordingly score them. Next is the position importance relative. So there may be like, some patents or some IP is offensive, others are defensive. And so we have to understand that how is it positioned, how it will be used. It can be an indication given by the patentee or the assignee. For example, Sony might have high, medium, low patents. They have internally classified, and they don't really bother even spending time and effort in putting a number to their low patents. Low is not low in quality, by the way. Please don't mistake it for quality. Low is in terms of commercial viability and their understanding of whether it is going to be of high value or not. So their value assessment is for that particular application is low, right? If you get to know that, that is another parameter we can consider from the assignee Sony. Then the broad industry where it will operate, for example, if it's a very crowded innovation space, like in 4G patents, or IoT now increasingly, or artificial intelligence, or machine learning, data science. These are the buzzwords. Cryptocurrency. Lot of people are trying to innovate and file lot of patents. If you do a landscape, right? There is a lot of research going on in batteries now, because we have probably reached a plateau there that batteries have to be charged, and lot of multimedia software and features are now inbuilt, and it kind of consumes a lot of battery. So there may be certain industries which is very densely populated, certain others which is not. So that is a quality value of an IP asset if it is in a sparsely populated domain. At a macro level, if you see, and sorry, last point was for the competitors again, if there is a very high barrier to entry, you have a super value patent which the competitors cannot create for another 3 years, or they have to put in a lot of money investment. Hence, the quality of your patent is super high. Or it is a standard patent. It has created standard in the domain that this is how the next generation communication will happen using this data packet format. Then it's a super quality patent. You can give a high score. But overall, at a macro level, if you don't want to go, because the micro level assessment of quality needs an expert knowledge of patents. If I take it as an example of intangible assets or trademarks, right? Expert level, you need to really understand lot of nuances of a quality of a patent document. Whereas at macro level, you may not need that kind of subject matter expertise. Overall, you'll see that, no, okay, this is a pharmaceutical product, and I probably have 5 years of commercial exploitation time, because I took a lot of time to have clinical trials, and then the drug approval authorities took a lot of time. So what is the overall lifespan? So I'm a CEO kind of a person, or CFO, who is looking at how much can I make in what time, and what is the impact of it, and how much I have to pay for maintaining and all that. So that also tells me a quality of patent. So if it is if it is a vaccine for corona, for example, right, the life is not going to be much, because it is needed, it is urgent, it is super critical, it is important. But once vaccinated, it's gone, right? So that perspective, if you consider, the value of the corona patent may not essentially be super high. And there is a big debate, by the way, going on, and I know I'm opening a Pandora's box here, that whether it should be patented at all, because it should be subjected to compulsory licensing, or the research should be funded by government for the welfare of the public, and it should be easily made available. And that is what is happening. We are all getting vaccinated free of cost. So just an example. Now, as you would have noted, so qualitative analysis of value of a patent needs a lot of assumptions. That what will be the assumptions I need to consider? What are the factors of scoring? For example, broad claim, less number of words, no rejections during prosecution of the patent, faster grant, all that I can define, right? And what is the scoring system? I may use some sort of model, and I can assign weights to these factors, and I can calculate the final score. What is the scale? If I may want to use a scale of 100 or 10 or 5 or 1, even 1, sometimes people go in decimals. So I can define that. It is not necessary that everybody will accept it, but I am at my liberty to define. Then uh, uh, there may be lot of other, so criteria is one, factors is other, so other set of limitations. So there may be lot of other considerations I need to take into account while I simply put a number to my quality, because it may not directly have an impact as claim scope, but it may have other impacts, right? So I need to put down all those assumptions when I create a model, and I need to validate it based on my human understanding and correct it. Then there are last of important part is the decision rule. That means when the score is computed for quality, I should define a threshold that beyond this, if the score is, let's say on a scale of 10, if the score is beyond 6, I will call it high. If the score is below 3, I will call it low. And between 3 to 6, I will call it, let's say, medium, or I don't know, average, or whatever. Right? So those are my rules, my factors, my scaling, my system, my model, and I keep on running it through a particular set of patterns or IP assets. I keep on correcting my assumptions or tweaking them so that I agree as a human evaluator that the machine or the system is throwing correct values. Then I have a qualitative valuation model. Now we come to the last part of the presentation, quantitative valuation. It is more to do with the calculation of monetary value of the IP. The earlier one was a number that indicated qualitative aspect, right? This is more to do with the actual worth of the asset in terms of money, right? There are various models. I have just picked up 3 most commonly used, but there are many more. So the first model is cost model. That is very straightforward. That how much, what is the approximate IP value which which will be determined based on a replacement cost. So if you have to create, suppose you have an IP today, okay, a patent granted, how much of investment will go into developing that IP, which is a replacement of your IP, or how much of investment will go in working around or creating around your IP, and how much time will also take. Time is also cost, by the way. We usually think cost is money, right? And there is a concept of equivalent IP, which is very subjective. I have to define what is equivalent IP. My claim is for a water purifier in a particular way, that it has stages of reverse osmosis and ultraviolet and water filtration, and I don't know, some very, very unique sea minerals being mixed for better nutrition value. Now a similar IP creation has to be defined as a different water purifier having I don't know what all things, and how much time and cost it will involve, right? This model is useful only when basically there are no other models or data available, okay? But it is not, it does not do a lot of justice to the innovation and the uniqueness aspect of the IP, basically the qualitative aspects of IP, which we spoke about earlier. How fast it was granted, how less number of rejections were there. It doesn't look at that. It just looks at cost, right? Numbers. Now, equivalent or identical IP is subjective, as I said, because for a particular domain, it may be easy to qualify something as identical. For another domain, it may be difficult, right? So, and for the cost model, another problem with it is, you remember, this entire exercise of valuation is not at a planning stage. You may want to do it somewhere, after you have a good understanding of your IP creation. Meaning, best done after you have a granted patent, not when you are yet to even think about the invention. No, because for calculating the value, you need a lot of things already there. Study the market, study the cost, study the impact, qualitative aspect, quantitative aspect. So valuation is not a planning activity. It is probably suited for a later time when you already have the IP asset, remember. Okay, so intangible assets tend to grow over time. Sometimes they assume a lot of value over time, and so their value is transient. What is the value of IP today may not be the same after 2 years. So it is difficult to keep on calculating the value based on this model of cost. Second is a market model, which is, I would say, much more prevalent and acceptable. A lot of companies, consulting firms like KPMG, PCG, and the like, McKinsey's of the world, excel in this kind of a model. They use it as a part of their M&A, mergers and acquisition study for the company, and they create a value model in which one component will be IP assets, others will be there. So in that, they use the economic principle of competition and equilibrium. Basically, who are the competitors, how stiff is the competition, and is there an equilibrium established, or are we talking about the market factors at an equilibrium? Equilibrium is nothing but a state where the forces of supply and demand are at an equilibrium or constant and are not going to change the economic factors much. Okay, so these are certain assumptions, and this is very statistical and kind of a business analyst job here, where you study the impact of various factors on the supply and demand, right? Usually the prices in any market, by the way, for any product, any domain, the price of a commodity is driven to, I mean, there is a tendency to drive it to an equilibrium point, but due to various variations in supply and demand, it may come up and low, be below that or above that. So market analysis of or market model or approach of quantitative valuation considers all such variations. Then comparing prices at which similar IP has exchanged between. So what was the price point of a similar IP, and that was traded between buyers and sellers? That means what is the cost the buyer is ready to give, what is the price at which the seller is ready to sell at equilibrium point is a consideration. And market model again works very well for tangible assets, where the cost is reflective of the true value. But for intangible assets, it may not. It may not reflect the true value, especially because IP resides in every product that comes out and then the number of products. So the calculations are exponential as against for tangible assets. The red points actually show a little bit of concern with this approach. It may not show the earning power of the technology. I mean, because of a lot of factors involved in intangible assets, it may not show the true value. And there is a cost to create around, which does not include time needed for the technology to become obsolete. So sometimes you only talk about how much competition is there and how much cost they will have to involve to come up with an equivalent IP or create around, but we don't talk about time. So that is not a good thing about the market approach. And in market approach, the infringement study, again, that is a qualitative aspect, is not considered, that how easy or difficult will it be for an infringer to infringe the IP. It will only talk about the market dynamics, the prices, the competitor price, supply and demand curve, and other economic factors which will impact the market share of a current product or technology. This is the last slide. And so this is another model, income model, where there is a projection of future revenues expected from IP asset over a period of time. So time period and revenues expected from IP asset. It is wholly based on income. How much income will I earn? So because over a period of time it comes in, time is a very essential consideration. Also because the money will lose value or there will be inflation, right, over a period of time. So that is also consideration. And there will be a risk that it may not be realized. So there are essential components, which is kind of here straightforward: market penetration, sales forecast, time, inflation, and risk. Then there would be other costs involved, because income will be revenue minus cost. So for calculating the income, I now first calculate the revenues and also look at all the risks that I may not realize that revenue. Then I calculate the cost, the production cost, overheads, and the commercialization cost. I deduct it and I get my income. So that is one model of putting a number, quantitative number to my IP asset. There is another model I have not mentioned. It's called direct model, or more like an IP exchange, where IP assets have an index. It can be traded as a share, right? Like in the share market, in the stock exchange. So there is a company called Ocean Tomo, and either it's an individual also. They filed for a patent for creating or generating an index for an IP asset like patent. Okay, and they'll put a number to it. They have a model based on qualitative and quantitative factors. They would put a number to that patent, like that for all the patents, and they can be listed according to the increasing or decreasing order of that number. That number is supposedly indicative of the value that IP holds and not necessarily the value in money or worth. I'll take a pause and I'll take questions because I think we're very close to 1 o'clock. So I see a question, any authority on such valuation of intangible like? I would not say there is an authority. Authority is as much an authority as I would be in that field. I mean, or Professor Alok, you can say that you are an authority in valuation of a very particular domain of IP assets, for example, semiconductor devices. So there is no standard body. There are different bodies that have come together. There are different rules they have agreed between each other, amongst each other, rule of thumb, that we will go with, let's say, 30% of the, there would be some computation model which they will agree for a particular domain. So in semiconductor, they may say that the license fee should be X percentage of Y, where Y is this. So that is more of an agreement, which is a result of mutual consensual decision making, rather than a body coming up and saying, in this entire country, this is the valuation model you will use for this particular domain. It may be proposed, it may be there, it may be practiced, but I don't think it is universally or even in country accepted by one and all. Everybody wants to influence the model based on their interests, as I said. Any questions? I am waiting. I'm looking at the chat window.
There is one more question.
Yeah.
Can we say technology valuation is a subset of business valuation done only for technology on need basis?
Absolutely, absolutely. So technology valuation and business valuation are entirely different, and technology valuation is a subset, definitely, of a business valuation. There may be many business valuations where technology valuation is not even a consideration at all. At all. We talk about technology valuation only in the context of a technology, wherever there is technology. There are a lot of businesses where there is no technology. So it is not of a big concern for a cobbler who is using hand tools when we evaluate his business versus Amazon or an online service which has a lot of technology play. So business valuation is a broad term and technology is a subset. Thank you, Dr. Rekha, for that question. Good question. Does service sector use this? Yes, they would. So service sector will have a dependency on technology. We always think that only products are outcomes of technology, but increasingly so for the last few years, most, if not all, service sector companies, corporations, or functions are heavily dependent or relying on technology tools, right? So what they do is they don't develop those tools. they insource or subscribe to those tools like ERP or customer support interfaces from companies like Infosys, who holds the IP. So it may not be relevant for that service sector company in terms of technology valuation, but for Infosys, which is developing such products, it definitely has a lot of value because they generate a lot of revenue, lot of business using such service sector oriented technology tools. So it is relevant for Infosys, may not be relevant for the company that buys or subscribes the technology from Infosys. Any other question? I'm available. I mean, beyond 1 o'clock also, I can stay for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes if there are questions.
No, service sector does not necessarily mean the IT sector. Is it applicable for the other service sectors such as like tourism and?
Yes, yes. So if you say tourism, I can talk about technology-enabled tourism. I'm not talking about IP sector. I'm talking about services company which are providing services to end users in any domain, tourism, hospitality, whatever. And do they rely on technology? Very good example that comes to my mind because I was yesterday exploring it is Airbnb. Okay, very good example. Look at how they have brought together the concept of people who are super hosts or hosting guests in their residences versus people who want to be hosted. And the people who created the software is a third entity. The technology is so awesome. There is a server, there are a lot of devices installing. So the valuation of Airbnb is super duper dependent on technology. Their business valuation will have a super duper component of technology valuation. They better have a patent filed on this. Okay, they better have a very good patent filed on this. They will definitely get a lot of investments, or at least, due to pandemic, maybe their valuation would have taken a hit, but there was a lot of promise. So it is, although a tourism kind of industry, but it is heavily dependent on technology, which they build themselves. And they provide this service on the technology platform. So it is very relevant for them versus a company like Make My Trip, who would have outsourced their technology development of their app and tool to a third company like Infosys or third party software developer. And their valuation is more in terms of, now at least, in terms of the number of subscribers and the actual book of business, the book of revenue, how much they have generated. Not so heavily because technology did not create Make My Trip. Make My Trip created technology also. Whereas Airbnb, it's all about technology. That is the catch in Airbnb. I hope I have answered your question. Thank you. Thank you for the comment, RK Selvi. Any other question I can take? There are about 97 people and I will be very surprised if whatever I discussed, it was very clear. Okay, no questions. I think we can conclude.
Yeah, if there are any questions, the participants can unmute themselves and pose it directly to the resource person.
Okay.
Okay,
No,
so I believe there are no further questions. Yeah, so let's just move on to the duty of vote of thanks.
Thank you for the session, sir. I now invite Anina Vincent, of student of IUC APRS, doing her second semester in Integrated 5-year LLM IP PhD, to render vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sita Lakshmi. Good afternoon all. I hope everyone present here get a valuable information on the topic technology assessment and valuation. So first I would like to thank Sharat sir of Valuation for giving this wonderful class. Sir gave a crystal clear information about technology assessment and its valuation. I got many unknown information through this session. So thank you, sir. Then sir begins with the technology assessment meaning and need. Sir gave a lot of definition about this. Then discuss about factors impacting technology development. That is what does the technology do? What does the technology do? Then it is better than alternatives. Then all the questions are discussed there. Then after this are discussed about other factors impacting the technology adoption, and they are technology risk, political risk, social risk, environmental risk, political risk, social, everything is discussed through this class. Then sir vastly discuss about the valuation meaning. Then sir ask about why do we need valuation of IP. Then said about the valuation of intangible assets and types. The different types of valuations all are discussed. They are quantitative and qualitative valuation. All are vastly explained through this class. So thank you, Sharat sir, for giving this informative session. Yeah. Then next, I would like to thank Vasis sir, Reddy sir, Asha ma'am for giving this opportunity. Next, I would like to thank ATAL Academy and IUCPRS for giving this platform of study. Finally, I would like to thank everyone present here for your keen participation and attention. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So Sharat sir, thanks a lot for accepting our invitation for the second time, and in fact providing your insights on this particular topic. So it was indeed very informative even for us, and I believe even the participants would have been immensely benefited from your talk. Thank you. So participants, so we'll break for now, break for lunch, and we'll resume at 2 p.m.
Thank you, Ratish. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and truly appreciate the initiative. This is an awesome platform, and thank you everyone on this call for being a patient listener and for your attention.